All right, welcome to MLOps Live, the webinar series where we explore what it really takes to bring data science into production and drive real business impact with AI. I'm Edith, I'm the head of marketing at Aguazio, an AI startup acquired by McKinsey back in 2023. And I am thrilled to have you all here with us today. We have a great session ahead. Today's topic is using agentic framework to build new AI services. And we're joined by two fantastic speakers. Rory Richardson, the Director, Next Gen Dev Experience, Gen AI GTM at AWS, and Yaron Chaviv, Co-founder and CTO of Aguazio, a McKinsey company. And with that, let's get started. Yaron, over to you.
So thank you, Edith. Today we have a special guest from Amazon, Rory, and she'll present some of their solutions. And we're going to focus on how to use code, how to generate code using Gen AI technologies. And in general, what we see is the evolution from the traditional tooling in Gen AI, ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot as a way to, complete code examples to systems that can use multi-agent and build and test and verify and deploy and so on the different software solutions. And this way also accelerate quite significantly the time to market and the time to production building new products. Next slide. So just before we're too optimistic, there are still a lot of challenges. Anyone that really work with those code generation tools know what I'm talking about. Certain things around hallucination. A lot of the tools are working on a single file level. You change an API on one file, it breaks the APIs on a different one. Certain technology choices, like I've built solutions where all the exception handling was really not properly designed, not properly working, or even hiding errors. All the notion around how to build an architecture before you go and deploy and build the software is also sort of limited because of the small context window. So there are many issues in the current generation of tools that you need to be aware of. That is why we still need human in the loop that understand what he's doing. We still need people to pretty well define what they want to see and also be question the results and not necessarily trust whatever the coding tools generated for them. And we have some examples and categories of challenges around this code generation tools. And next. And what we see is the evolution in that space, which is also rapid, like everything around Gen AI, from systems that only completed at the single function, single file level, to systems that are more advanced and can work across multiple files and essentially be able to work with Git and run more sophisticated flows, to systems that are pretty agentic. And one solution that was recently launched is a solution from Amazon called Agent Core, and Rory is gonna talk about it in a minute. But as we see the evolution from the traditional or the older, saying older on something that was a couple of years ago, it's still interesting. But those systems evolve very rapidly, and we see the huge advancement in terms of developer productivity and completeness of the solution. Again, being able to address the complete project, multiple files, all the aspects of testing, deployment, bots that can change the code, test, take the bug, fix it, and so on in a loop. So again, reduces more overhead from the user, being able to build designs that are more holistic, and so on. So without further ado, let's move now to Rory to talk about her perspectives and the Amazon product in the space.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I appreciate the intro. I've had one of the more unusual careers at AWS. I've been here almost 13 years, and I've worked across a variety of technologies. The technologies that I've chosen to specialize in tend to be stuff that isn't quite mainstream yet. That means I worked on DynamoDB before non-relational databases were really commonplace. I worked on Aurora MySQL. I worked on Lambda and the entire serverless stack. Because what I really gravitate towards is technology that opens up opportunities across a huge population. And I don't think the developer tools, as they've incorporated generative and agentic AI, are any exception. I truly think these are going to accelerate and democratize the world's access to innovation. So whenever I don't know what to do with the technology, which I certainly didn't know what to do with generative AI back in 2024, I tend to ask my kids. This is a picture of my son. And what I asked him to do is to start doing his homework with chat. What I found was rather remarkable because the assignment that my kid did was 20x, well, 10x more creative and 10x more complex than anything he had ever written before. And that wasn't the result of chat. It was more that chat was able to make sentences syntactically correct. The paragraph construction made sense. In other words, it compressed abstraction layers. And I thought that was a fascinating idea that we're going to be able to go from intent of what we want to create all the way down to ones and zeros, because as a technologist, I live in abstraction layers. By the way, this is a picture of him. He came into my room the other day and asked for a briefcase. I immediately thought he was trying to build a bomb, but instead he wanted to build a laptop out of his spare parts. He doesn't use the cloud. He only uses antiquated technology, but at least he installed Debian. So I've got that going for me. So the evolution of agentic AI has been rapid for sure, moving from just having like generative AI assistants or plugins into the existing IDEs into creating bespoke generative AI agents. And now we're on to full agentic AI systems. And I think Jan really alluded to that path and all of the elements that were part of the evolution of how people are creating agents today. And the technology innovation from having plugins into existing IDs to full agentic systems and agentic IDEs has happened in a period of just 2 very short years. So while we started with being able to add coding suggestions back in 2003, where we found is that we needed to evolve. When we started creating agents, like /dev or, /test, we found that we were having to teach humans what agents to use for what task versus teaching the technology on how humans are working. In other words, we had to get away from just calling bespoke agents and prompt engineering to a far more intuitive and conversational experience, which meant that we needed to increase context. Not only context of the profile information from the individual engineer, but also the full context of what they were trying to build and the environment that they were working on. As we increased the aperture of context, we were able to get much more complex agent construction. All right, so I'm going to put this definition of agent out there mainly because there seems to be a lot of different definitions of what the heck is an agent anyway. And as a person who's worked on this for about 3 years, I can say that, it's a little frustrating not being able to fully communicate, oh, I'm creating an agent, it's doing this thing. So I want to take a moment to these are some of the core characteristics of an agent. The first three make a lot of sense and have been around for a couple of years. You want something that can perform a task asynchronously with some degree of autonomy, meaning it can make some informed decisions based on the context that you're giving it. And it performs it with a degree of agency outside of what a standard application would do. Now, about 6 months ago, I added this word atomic because what we were seeing is as people were creating their own bespoke agents, that the scale and scope of the agents was actually getting smaller based on their data sources. And then that was allowing them to do more and more complex things by combining agents together. A lot of this was made possible through agent to agent protocols like MCP server or A to A. I think MCP server remains the most popular protocol for agent to agent communication, but that ability for agents to talk to each other meant that we were able to, build atomic agents into more and more complex tasks or molecules. This is the rise of creating something more complex in order to manage all of those agents as well. Getting back to the software development lifecycle, there's three big buckets that we wanted to focus on. We really wanted to be able to create an optimized build experience. We wanted to figure out how to operate that software in a far more efficient way. And then we wanted to retire tech debt and transform and modernize legacy code and legacy workloads to free developers up to innovate. I think Gartner recently published that developers spend approximately 73% of their time maintaining old code. Now, I can tell you as a former software developer engineer, nobody gets up in the morning and goes, I cannot wait to maintain somebody else's code that was poorly written and there's no documentation for. So if we really want to democratize and accelerate innovation, we need to retire tech debt. So there are a lot of capabilities in Amazon Transform already, including being able to upgrade Java, accelerate mainframe modernization, move VMware into EC2, and move from .NET to .NET Core. We are the week before reInvent, and there's even more stuff coming that is going to accelerate the ability to retire tech debt and give us more freedom into figuring out how we can optimize our developers' time. So let's start with build. In the course of the last 2 years, as we've moved from creating plugins into existing IDEs, we moved into creating bespoke agents. We also saw this the rise of something new under the sun, and that was agentic IDEs. Agentic IDEs are optimized for collaboration. Initially, they were optimized for not collaborating with humans, but collaborating with other agents. So within the agentic IDE, you're able to get context and have junior agents watching what you're doing in order to anticipate what you may need. The problem with vibe coding, though, is, well, there's still a world where you kind of need to have a bigger plan and collaborate with other developers. So when we launched our agentic IDE Kiro, we wanted to combine the flow of vibe coding, but also with the clarity of creating specs. And this marriage of these two worlds sort of combines the best of both. If you're able to have spec-driven development, you're able to create more and more complex things. What we were focused on was the ease of getting started with fairly easy tasks, but also with the ability to have a spec-driven development to collaborate with other folks. So let's take a look at a short demo. Here we have our agents directly in the IDE, and they are embedded into the existing tooling today. But we've gotten to the point where it just needs to be more intuitive. Here, Garo is using the documentations like that we can find in Jira in order to establish what are our steering documents for this project. Then we're able to ask to create a spec using some of this documentation and calling into the MCP server within Jira in order to accelerate. Being able to take the context of what we already have in Jira in order to create the code that we're looking for. All right, now we've got an outline of what our user story is going to be. And now we're on to the design document. It's generating a design document that we can go, okay, well, this kind of makes sense of what we were thinking is going to be necessary from the Jira doc. Next, we're going to have to create the test list and go to implementation. Again, at each stage, it's the developer that is verifying and making these choices. I get the question a lot from a lot of folks. I was like, well, how do you know that the code is good? How do you know that it's what it's not malicious code or it's verified? Well, there's always still a human in the loop in order to make these decisions. All right. Next, we are looking at how to create agent hooks in order to pull in greater context. It has created the hook into the steering documents. We're going to take a look at verifying the instructions for the agent. Yep, looks good. And then we want to take a look at an idea of doing multimodal prompting. So instead of just having language that we text, we have the ability now to take a look from a diagram and say, okay, I've got this mermaid chart. How can we create a spec based on this idea? And then it starts with creating requirements based on our sketch of the architecture diagram above. In other words, we're breaking down the barriers between just, written communication, but into a way to visually interact with the code itself. Now, this is great if you're a developer, you know what a spec is, you know how to connect into Jira, but there's also a large population that isn't necessarily in the IDE. One of the greatest surprises that we have seen over the last year was the number of folks that want access into being able to create with Agentic AI that honestly probably don't even have an IDE installed on their computer. What that means is that they are able to interact with the CLI to create applications. They can run tests, access other ABIs, even deploy code and connect to MCP servers, all through a natural language interface. So let's take a look at the quick demo that I have up for terminal access. And again, it's pretty lightweight. It's a command line interface. Like a lot of technologists, the command line interface is home base. And being able to interface directly by connecting into Jira without ever having to go into the IDE, being able to create MCP servers into other repositories on the fly, like Confluence, GitHub, makes this a heck of a lot easier. We also have people creating fun applications just from the command line interface. One of my colleagues is a dungeon master and created a 3D mapping image application based on the documentation of how he created stories within Dungeons and Dragons. Pretty simple application, did it completely through the command line interface without necessarily looking at a single line of code in order to figure out how to create a bespoke application. So in this demo, we're asking questions for refining how we are developing the story for our demo project. One of the great things about connecting through MCP servers is refining the prompt before it hits the LLM. That allows us to cost optimize. So instead of pinging the large language model in order to do the refining of the prompt, we can refine with MCP servers even ahead of when it hits the actual inference layer. All right. So if we take on the idea that developers are probably, like 2 years ago, spending only 4 to 5 hours per week in the IDE, then that means, well, what the heck are they doing for the other 35 hours? Initially, about 2 years ago, a lot of folks were looking at these tools in terms of the acceptance rate in order to establish, like, is this a good tool for how or increasing value out of my developers? McKinsey and Gartner went so far as saying, oh, your developers are going to be 40% more productive. Yeah, maybe in the IDE, but are you going to be able to release code 40% faster if you're just looking at productivity within the IDE? Probably not. But every CFO out there heard, oh, I'm going to fire 40% of my developers. That hasn't happened. But instead of looking at just developer productivity, we quickly realized we needed to start looking at the full development productivity. That means how fast can you get to code that you love, not just how fast can you code. If you're measuring just how fast you can code, you're going to get some pretty bad code, but it's going to be fast. We took a stab at measuring the full software development lifecycle and gave a talk at our New York summit If you're interested, it's a blog post by James Hoffwart, where if he looked at a more systemic view of measurement, he established that these tools were upping our productivity of development by about 15.9%, which still is pretty remarkable when you're looking at coding faster. But that was just the beginning. That was back in July. Now that it's November, we've seen even greater productivity gains across our engineering teams. And not just because they're using an agentic IDE, but they are using AI for a number of other tasks outside of just code creation. When you think about your software development lifecycle, there's room to apply AI at each stage of your software development lifecycle, not just in the create phase, but also test, build, deploy, operate, and monitor. So if we take that notion with the other idea that I introduced with having an agent that could orchestrate, monitor, and verify other sub-agents, you get this notion of what we could be building as Jarvis. Now, just hang with me for a second. I'm a huge sci-fi fan. And when I was thinking about how to describe how these new agents are working together, obviously Iron Man was first in my head. Now, don't go full Ultron in this example, but think about like where Jarvis started in Iron Man 1. He was just a natural language interface to the devices in Tony's house. By the time we get to Iron Man 3, Jarvis already knows all of the engineering projects Tony's ever worked on. He has a deep understanding of all of the systems in Tony's house. And Tony is able to go to his holodeck and go directly into ideation through natural language, not at the programming level, not at Python, but being able to articulate, this is what I want to build. And then when he's done prototyping, he's able to look over at Jarvis and said, all right, now go off and build the Iron Legion. And Jarvis does, agentically, by manipulating all of the other agents within Tony's environment. Now take that into our world. Think about how we are going to be interfacing with these fully autonomous agents that are going to be directing, coordinating, evaluating, and verifying the work of other agents, but not just 1P, not just within the AWS environment, but across your entire environment. I mean, like a lot of you, we don't always have all of our monitoring and our observability in just one place. Sometimes we incorporate 3P solutions like Datadog or Dynatrace or New Relic. Integrating with those 3P solutions will give you a single pane of glass across your environment as you're planning for resiliency. So what we're trying to build is the ability to compress these abstraction layers and fully democratize how you're able to address and build solutions. Now, outside of just the agents that we talked about within AWS, I took a stab at trying to understand, like, what are all the key decisions you need to think about when you're starting to build your own agent or very bespoke agent. First, you need your development tooling. Most folks get started either in an IDE or in a command line interface. Obviously, our answer at AWS is Kiro, which is fully GA now. But then you're going to have to make a decision about your framework. We offer the Strands SDK, but maybe you'll make a different decision, like LangChain or Crew AI. Then we realize there's a lot of primitives that everyone has to think about when they're thinking about building their agent. You need somewhere for your agent to live, like where's the runtime? You need a way to allocate memory so that the agent can have context from one prompt to another. You need a way to integrate with 1P tools, establish an AI gateway, manage the identity of the agent, and then be able to observe how the agent is functioning in order to understand how to optimize for it and what it should be connected to. So we started with these 7 primitives as part of Agent Core, but there's more primitives that are coming very, very quickly over the next 3 to 6 months, because we feel that these elements were the building blocks that everybody would need to think about when they are building an agent. Next step is you're going to think about your inference. I mean, obviously we have Amazon Bedrock, and you can use the Nova models, you can use Anthropic, and And that's really depending on what you're trying to build as to what inference model you want to use. But the crown jewels or the secret sauce to building bespoke agents is your data. And data has gravity. Being able to unlock your data, whether it's an S3 or a database like Redshift, is really dependent on creating MCP servers or access for those data stores. And if you're able to unlock the treasure trove of data that you have within your environment, then you're going to get a lot of more value out of your environment. So we launched things like the Amazon S3 vectors in order to be able to connect into unlocking that data so that you can move faster in creating your own bespoke agents. So I tried to give you a high level overview of all of the elements that are available to you for creating your own agents or using agents to create faster. I truly believe this is the most important technical innovation of my lifetime because I have seen it greatly accelerate and disrupt how we think about technology internal to AWS, as well as seeing people create on a scale that I had never thought possible. The amount of folks that are able to get started with Kiro and create their own applications is truly staggering. And if we think about how to future-proof or how we're going to use these tools for the future, I'm encouraged by how people are thinking ahead. I mean, we talked a little bit in the beginning about like how to safeguard for the future. And while we have guardrails and automated reasoning, and we're soon going to be launching policies for Agent Core in order to give them granular control and access, I'm also really surprised and heartened by the amount of steps people are taking on themselves in order to create agents and technology to help future-proof for the world. It's not because the compliance standards are enforcing a very prescriptive way of creating agents and then how they're monitoring, where they have access and how are they monitoring permissions and agents. It's not a compliance issue or a regulation issue. It's that people are trying to think ahead of what is the right thing to do. So with that, thank you very much for having me and letting me give you a short overview of where we are with agentic architecture and agentic systems at AWS. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Joran.
Before you jump into your slides, I am just going to take a real quick moment and share the poll with everyone. So we will hear from Yaron in 1 minute. So I'm going to go ahead now and launch the poll for today. Okay, so if you guys can please take a moment and let us know, where are you today on your agentic AI journey? It's a single choice question, so just take a moment and let us know. Are you just exploring the concepts? Are you prototyping with small agentic workflows? Are you running agents in production for select use cases? Or are you actually working on scaling multi-agent systems?
Thank you, Rory. That was very interesting and pretty inspiring to see what you guys are doing in Amazon. So I'll share a little bit about what we're doing in McKinsey around agentic AI and with a couple of slides, and then we'll open up to questions. What we've seen across the board with agentic AI, again, a lot of experimentation, but when we run into projects with clients, we have those challenges that you see here around limited scaling beyond pilots, and also people don't usually get to production. It's a nice playground, but people are very hesitant to go to production or didn't do all the engineering work to really get there. The lack of end-to-end impact, as Rory mentioned on coding, maybe the efficiency got up, but end-to-end is still not generating the results. You still need the same amount of people for the project and also other aspects in there. So what we did in McKinsey, essentially, we're trying to build solutions that are more integrated and leverage agentic. This is an example of a technical stack that uses, on one end, ML that knows how to provision services and microservices, and whether it's LLMs or MCP servers or A2A servers, and together with other assets like data that is used across the board to build those systems. But one of the things that we wanted to build is something even higher level abstraction. This is something called agent at scale, which is the ability to generate agents through just descriptive language, not even through coding. And I'll do a short demo of that solution. What we see here is a solution from McKinsey, new, called Agent at Scale. And this essentially has a notion of groups, tools, agents, transformers. It's sort of usually for the data movement and workflow. So these are groups, tools, and so we can create workflows that are entirely agentic, and you'll see them in how we build those. Every flow may have multiple steps. For example, we started using it in projects like product code modernization or customer service and so on. So in those cases, we have agents and a flow where data is generated. Then we have an agent or a group, a squad that has an agent that is a planner, an agent that is a critic, agents that interface with data, and so on. And we can build workflow. The way things are done is simply you can define for such group you have, again, sort of a planner, a critic, agents that do the actual interfacing with the work, and you can define in a very high level terms what this group is trying to achieve. We have those groups and those workflows. And then if we dive into a specific tool, everything is done in a descriptive manner. You don't even write code. You can describe this is a task, the thing it needs to do X, Y, Z. And it's essentially the prompts are translated using AI into those agentic workflows. And then we can just follow through this workflow as it acts. So we have logs that, there's one step after the other that happens. For example, generating the full workflow. And then in this demo, we also access files and store files and markdowns. The next step may pick up the results of the first step and continue to work in the entire workflow. So this is a very quick peek into a solution that we're building. Again, trying to build something much higher level that people can build a workflow, business workflows, and all sorts of tasks without essentially no code, just very high level description. And that sits on top of foundations that are all microservices and Kubernetes and resilient. So it's production ready. So with that, we can start opening up questions. I noticed there's a lot of questions for you, Rory, and here I'll stop sharing.
Let's start out with a question for Rory. As Yaron mentioned, there are a bunch. How effective is the CLI versus IDE based development?
I think that if you're actually doing production level code, most people are going to be using the IDE environment. So the effectiveness isn't like a shared measurement or an industry standard that I can really speak to. They are currently using two different LLMs, but we also recently launched the ability to choose which LLM that you want for development. So if I was a real developer, I'm definitely in the IDE because I'm doing spec-driven development. Spec-driven development eventually will come to the CLI as well. But right now, the CLI is more of a vibe coding experience because it lacks the tie-ins into agent hooks and spec-driven development.
Okay, and the same person asked about metrics. Do you have any metrics on the acceptance criteria from developer communities?
To be honest, we kind of moved away from the acceptance rate because we found it was measuring how dumb the developers were and not how great the tools were. Because if you're not a great developer and you want to get finished really quickly, accept, 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 not really going to help you get to code that you love. That's why we took a view of trying to get to the measuring the full SDLC, because other things were hard to measure as well, like shifting left. Obviously, fixing code vulnerabilities at code inception is a heck of a lot cheaper than fixing code vulnerabilities during a security review. But how to measure something that's not there, or how to measure, oh, there wasn't a problem, was kind of hard to do. One of the greatest KPIs that I liked that we used internally was reducing the number of code reviews, because we found that the code, if there were less code reviews, it was because the code was in better condition by the time it got to a senior developer for the review. That means the unit tests were done, documentation was there, less security vulnerabilities because they agentically checked for that. That is one KPI that we were using, but that's why we stood up this whole team under James Hoffwart to sort of dive into how we're able to affect the full software development lifecycle. Obviously, a productivity increase of 15.9 is not the same as 40%. But I also have a little bit more faith in it because we were able to dig in internally and verify that we actually were seeing a 15.9% increase in productivity across the full software development lifecycle.
Thank you for that. So the next question I have for Yaron, I think based on the demo that you showed in the last few slides, was how do you train these agents and how do you evaluate the agent result?
So training an agent is not like you don't train a model. It's more around verifying the agent results and then sort of fine tuning the prompt and potentially other attributes or parameters of this agent. The question was how we're training them, and the second one was?
And how do you evaluate the agent result?
So we do have part of a monitoring system that every question, answer, or every step goes into a monitor system, and then we have different tools. For example, LLM as a judge, or other methods of evaluating. Another technology that we're working on is leveraging graph databases and so on to be able to understand better if the results match the accepted results. So that's part of the techniques we're using.
Thanks, Yaron. Okay, Rory, for you. So someone asked, can you say something about typical caveats with vibe coding, that it does 80% of the dev work, but the 20% remaining takes 80% of the effort? For example, adding robustness, error handling, etc.
Also kind of related to, is AI going to replace developers? Right? Because that's what we're most afraid of. AI is coming from my job. I think Gartner said it best and said that I don't think AI is coming for developers, but I think a developer using AI is probably going to replace a developer without using AI. It's, instead of thinking it deterministically, like and just accepting the code that you're getting as a suggestion, it's still the responsibility of the developer to architect and pull stuff together. Threading the needle between fine-grained access of being able to look at the composite components of something and tweak it and debug it and build it for scale is still firmly in the purview of humans and developers. But being able to get started through natural language and create like a prototype really easily without necessarily having to go through a lengthy spec creation process with a number of PMs or other individuals, like you could just stand up something really quickly, is also very beneficial. Now, you're going to have to do both. I mean, I don't think computer science is dead by any stretch of the imagination, but I do have concerns about the syntax of Python. Like, is it really important to teach people syntax anymore? I don't think so. And I think about this a lot because my kid's 15, right? And by the time that my kid hits the job market, is how important is Python anymore? What is the interface for how he's going to interface with, create technology? So instead, it's changed my parenting. I focus on creativity and grit and getting them to do, really complex and interesting projects that they're passionate about, and then seeing it all the way to completion instead of memorizing a bunch of stuff. When I went to school, they give you a book, you memorized, you got a bunch of tests, you based on those books. None of that's valuable anymore. I have the power of the entire world in my purse. So why would I spend brain cells on something that is so cheap and so fast? Instead, we've shifted the cognitive load. We've shifted it away from knowledge and wisdom into really deep analysis, not surface analysis, and synthesis. And so when you think about like, how do I get this vibe coding thing into production? It's still the purview of the humans to figure out what is the gap between I just vibe code this crazy thing that barely works into production. It's like the difference between Access database and a proper like enterprise relational database like SQL Server or Oracle. It's a huge difference.
Maybe I can also chime in.
Yeah,
Uh,
please, please.
so I worked also quite a bit with the different tools and the challenge you're getting a code. I'll give you an example with Python. You're getting an exception and then the sort of a pass in the exception, which sort of the wrong thing to do because you're actually not going to see the error that your code generated. So you think everything runs well, but essentially the error is hidden. So there are still a lot of patterns that if I want go over the code or suddenly I see imports within a function where instead of being in the global import, they're sort of in a sub function. And not to mention about aspects around, how to do logging and how to do observability, et cetera, everything that is requires a little more experience in sort of architecture and modeling systems. So you still need to be critical of what you're getting. You still need to be able to look at it, review, say, no, no, not this way, I need something else. We need to be able to build specs. Usually I would first start by tell me what you're going to do or give me a design of how you're going to design this or solve this problem before you code. Then we're ratifying the design, just like you're doing with systems, or reviewing the design, and only then moving to coding after you really validated that all the assumptions that you wanted to take will be there. So there's still you use it as a power tool, but it's not going to substitute humans anytime soon.
Thank you both so much. And I'm just thinking, Rory, when you were talking, I was thinking, how many hours in college did I spend memorizing things, you know? And now that's just you don't need to. You just ask ChatGPT, you ask any AI tool, and the answers spit out right back at you. So the priorities of, developers, the priorities of really the general public has changed so much. And, the workflows need to be adjusted accordingly. So I completely hear you there. Okay, I think we have time for probably one more question before we start wrapping up. So, as of now, we are talking about reducing the time of development. But if we are losing a lot of time in finalizing the requirements, which involves discussion with a lot of stakeholders, can agentic AI help us in that regard as well? I don't know, probably both of you guys have an opinion about this.
But I think in general, the agentic AI can solve all of the problem. There's still some more futuristic projects that we're working on in McKinsey that are trying to essentially bring efficiency not just to the coding aspects, also to things even within McKinsey that does consultancy and understand what use cases you want to do. Even in those areas, we're trying to take industries and understand how we analyze what a client needs and be able to even suggest what kind of project he needs to do, even going beyond how the project needs to look like, and building all sorts of ways of learning from his data, what we can do with that data, and trying it and thinking about what kind of projects could be built from in order to address business challenges. So overall, we're seeing how agentic AI will spread itself not just to the coding and design, to other areas of product development and version management and so on.
Yeah, I would take it a step further as well, because when we think about this evolution from an individual just vibe coding, there's not really a whole lot of team development. But if you're able to have something more standardized like spec-driven development, being able to collaborate with other team members becomes more available. I do think it may shrink the size of the teams per project because of the efficiency gains. And we're seeing part of that experiment play out in real time here at AWS, where we're seeing there's a lot of muck to development that if you clear some of that up, our two pizza teams are actually getting a little bit smaller and more efficient. again, this doesn't mean that we're firing 40% of our developers, but it does mean that we're able to do more with less in a way that is radically changing our own efficiency. So that collaboration with the other humans is definitely happening, but it's changing the nature of the work since a lot of the muckier tasks are actually more automated.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So you're changing the size of the pizza now, or?
I had a partner once say, "Hey, are you sure it's still a two pizza team because AI doesn't eat pizza?"
Mm-hmm.
Before we finish, I did want to wrap up and just invite you all to look and explore at our website at aguazio.com. You'll see past webinar sessions, use cases, a lot of different blogs, case studies, best practices, kind of to the point of if you're looking, just to start off with Agentic AI and Gen AI, I really do encourage you to go and browse what we have on our website. And we'd love to hear your feedback. But before we end the session, I want to just say thank you. Thank you to Rory and Yaron for the time, the effort in creating this excellent presentations. And of course, a huge thank you to all of you for taking an hour out of your day and participating with us today and for the incredible questions that came in. So we do look forward to seeing you in our next session. And thank you all for taking the time and joining.
Great, thank you, and thanks, Rory, for attending.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.